with a first match against PI me. I mean, that's got to be like their best case scenario.
How wild would it be to have Golden Guardians going up against PI me in an upper finals to start Sunday? That'd be just completely insane onto that end with how much we've seen Perplexed and Echo perform. But hey, Golden Guardians wants to be able to make that upset. They had a really strong day yesterday as well. And who knows? Sky could be the limit here, Nagra.
Definitely. I mean, this is a time trial dungeon, and Golden Guardians got the number 6 seed, while Perplexed actually got the number 1 seed. So it's a 2-minute difference between those two dungeons for Golden Guardians and Perplexed. But the time trials actually have been played before 9.0.5, so something's definitely changed with the dungeon and also with the comps that they have been playing. So everything is possible here. If Golden Guardians somehow managed to get a different strategy or somehow shave off a couple of minutes from their strat, then everything is possible. And we've also seen lots of teams struggle in this dungeon specifically, lots of deaths on some of those huge pulls. So if Perplex has any sort of issues, then that's the chance for Golden Guardians to win this first Spires.
That's right, going to be a lot of pressure onto them. And of course, like I said, this is the upper bracket, so losers going to be dropping down and have to be playing once again here. And looking at how well we're going to be seeing Golden Guardians start performing. As we know, we've had some of the roster changes, the roster shakeup and everything like that over the past couple of weeks here, Zyro. So at some point, we're looking at when are they going to start hitting their stride and try to improve a bit of their standings before we have our global finals in spring.
Yeah, and I mean, time has run out. This is it. This is their biggest opportunity to create a gap between themselves and the other two teams in those 4th and 5th slots. And if they're able to, jump from that 6th slot to that 4th slot, that'll give them a much better position for seeding in the global finals later in April. So, it all comes down for Golden Guardians right now. How much do you want to improve your position and, prove to yourselves and everyone else that you are the team that we think you can be?
Yeah, and, it's once again, that big surprise from the very beginning of the tournament that Golden Guardians, such a veteran, long-standing team, hasn't really been hitting that level that we've been expecting of them over many years of gameplay, and especially when they've had such an experienced and veteran roster as well here, Dratnos.
Yeah, there have been some weekends where there have just been meta games or dungeons that have just gotten the better of them. And, the Spires of Ascension has been a place where, they've lost a game and they've been like, this was just not a map that we really practiced. And that's something that needs to stop for them. It needs to stop being the case that it's a team that has these dungeons that aren't, ones that they're world class in, because that's something that's just not true of, the Echoes and the Perplexed of the world, right? You're never going to catch them in a dungeon that is not something where they at least have like a solid plan that they can execute most of the time. Obviously, mistakes will happen. We just saw that happen with Echo. We just saw a dungeon run and a half go entirely wrong for them. But there's got to at least be the comfort, right? You go into a dungeon, you know that it's a dungeon where it's part of your plan, it's part of your strategy. You're never really in this position where you go into these series and you write off one of the maps and you're just hoping that the other two go well. And I think that Golden Guardians has got that practice this time around. I think they do have a plan to take every single map that could potentially be thrown at them this weekend. So we'll get to see how that matches up against Perplexed, though, because Perplexed is the number 1 time trial time in this dungeon, and that is a very scary thing to be coming up against. As you mentioned, though, that was on the old patch, so maybe we'll have some updates, some innovation, and perhaps just the wrench that new patch has thrown into everything will completely provide an upheaval for the situation.
Yeah, it seems like every week we're having some other big change coming around the corner as well, Zyro. Last week it was looking at how quickly teams adjusted to Shadow Priest and Holy Pally. Now we've got just a slew of class changes and even some dungeon changes as well, like for Spires.
Yeah, but, I don't think the dungeon changes specifically in Spires are going to be too significant. Like, one of the changes that the teams have all been wanting for quite a while is, fix to the positioning of some mobs on the left side after the first boss that hasn't quite come in yet, unfortunately. Yeah. But I think the biggest change for Team Golden Guardians is they have dropped the Kindu spirit and they have adopted the spirit of the Bucko. So we'll see if that's, one of those major shifts in how they
what? You're gonna have to run that one by me again, Zyro.
All right, listen, Bucko.
Okay.
I'll explain it to you later.
All right. That sounds great.
Just look at their names when we actually
I see the names. Right? Okay. Well, we'll revisit this. Let's get into it. Game number 1, Golden Guardians and Perplexed. I gotta have a word with Zyro here.
All right, so we see both of those teams starting up that first pull. Of course, no difference here. All of the teams always pulling the whole hallway here. We see the Ashen Hallow being popped by JB. Not sure Ryzen used his as well.
Ryzen
Sometimes
did, yeah.
you see different kinds of... Okay, so both of the teams did commit their Ashen Hallow for this initial pull.
Yeah, you know, it's less sometimes that you really want it for a certain pull, although I think it does get a lot of value both in healing and in damage on this pull. And it's also just you want to get that thing on cooldown, right? You want to have that cooldown recovering while you're taking that Angel Flight, and you want to have it available again 4.5 minutes into the dungeon, and so that you can get as many uses as possible. So you really need to have a very good reason if you're going to do any sort of substantially sized pull, and you're not going to press Ashen Hallow if it's off cooldown, right? You need to have like a specific boss in the near future or a specific pull that you really need it for that's going to justify losing out on that cast over the course of the dungeon. And certainly this didn't meet that threshold. They don't need it for this first boss badly enough. In fact, this first boss sometimes doesn't cooperate with your Ashen Hallow because it lasts for 30 seconds and the boss moves all over the room and potentially out of your Hallow. As they're now getting into the second pull of the dungeon here, and you can see the cage is coming out on that Forsworn Mender from both teams. They will still get to 20% trash from the other mobs here, and they'll be able to spawn that Pride. And the Mender is actually the one that creates those weapons, that weapon buff on itself, which you can then either spell seal or purge or whatever, and it'll drop the weapon on the ground. You can pick it up and get a lot of extra damage out of it as well, and that can be used both on the Pride and on the boss for a little bit of extra value. So that's why you'll see teams usually caging that Mender and saving it for during the Pride or during the boss.
Yeah, it's a nice little trick here, as both Divine Field and, of course, the healer can also pick it up as well for Perplexed. Golden Guardians a little bit slower on this trash pull. Also, the first trash pull was being dealt with a little bit slower for Golden Guardians. So Perplexed seem to be having a bit more focus damage. I think that's the difference I've seen so far in those two Spires pulls. Whenever there was a difference in speed, even though they are playing the same comp and the same offensive cooldowns are being committed to that pull, it always seemed like whichever team had more focus damage on those higher HP mobs, like the Vanguard and the Goliath, was usually a team that just dealt with the pack faster. So Perplexed seem to be having just a little bit more focus target damage, as they're now pulling the boss, basically just pulling the Pride into the boss and just cleaving it down on it all. Golden Guardians doing the same thing, and both of the teams committing that Bloodlust, so they won't have the Bloodlust for that incredibly difficult pull after the 40% Pride, where we've seen lots of teams wipe to.
Yeah, that's a pull that caused so many teams so many problems in previous weeks of the MDI. This time around, though, now with that Holy Paladin, it's a pull for which they have Ashen Hallow. And so that provides the extra damage and the healing that you need to get through it without Bloodlust. And I think that's the idea behind firing off that first Ashen Hallow in the dungeon. Then you have Bloodlust here for this boss, and then you have Ashen Hallow for that really difficult trash pull on the right-hand side. As Perplexed, I mean, look at the speed with which Perplexed is moving through the dungeon here. They're already on this 6th Larian pull with the Darkseeker. Really great positioning here as well that's going to let them group everything up. This is tricky with Storming active, fighting in such a narrow area with those tornadoes, zoning them out as much as it is. But you can see they've done a really good job. Divine is under a lot of attack, but it looks like he's going to be okay there, hanging out at 7% health. And those Darkseeker casts from the Dark Praetor are really hurting him, but they are going to be okay. This is really sketchy.
Yeah, these Stealth Claws and the Dark Praetor doing a huge amount of damage to Divine Field, but it was so nice to see how fast they were gathering up this pull. So after the boss died, Ryzen immediately buffed Divine Field with Bop, so he can just jump through and pick up those Stealth Claws, because they're of course not visible, they're in stealth. So once you know where they are positioned, you can jump in them and pull, but if you don't actually hit them before they hit you, then you get stunned. So that's why the Bop was being used by Ryzen here immediately to just give Divine Field the tools to pull these mobs incredibly quickly. So well done by Perplexed, as the Golden Guardians are now also done with that trash. But yeah, just doing everything just slightly slower compared to Perplexed.
Yeah, so Perplexed is starting off this very big pull now. They have the Ashen Hallow down. They knocked out the Inspiring Mob to land a couple kicks, and now it's come back in, and they are going to be able to AoE everything down, and hopefully either finish off the Inspiring Mob. Yeah, they will be able to finish off the Inspiring Mob before they get those next fist casts that they'll need to interrupt. Look at how much damage they've been able to deploy here. Look at the damage that Ryzen's been putting out with that Ashen Hallow on this pull here. He's second place, just behind a Shine on the Hunter. In this pull. I mean, everybody in the entire group is really just cranking the meters right now. And that's going to be their 40% Pride spawned. They'll be finishing it off with the residual damage that's left over here. picking up that spear as well. Looks like it's going to be Divine who's going to be picking up that spear for later. Needs to dodge the beam as well. But Golden Guardians also making something happen over here. Looks like a slightly different set of enemies has been pulled, because I see a Dark Praetor that they're not in combat with. And I think that Perplexed pulled everything in this area. Maybe I'm wrong, though. Maybe we're going to see the same count. We are. So I'm wrong. Both teams skipped that very first pull on this platform. You can just walk around to the side, and we saw both of them do that, actually. I remember now, so that makes the pull a little bit more feasible. I think we've seen sometimes teams have pulled that one in back when they were using Bloodlust on this platform, but without it, it turns out to be just a little bit too much.
Yeah, definitely didn't want to take any risk and pulling 2 Praetors into this pack. It's also a little bit of an issue because they always jump out, which can cause just lots of time loss as well. Not just inefficiency when it comes to like damage on the tank and so on, but just a time loss because you cannot cleave it down evenly with the rest of the pack. Perplexed now gathering up another huge pull though with an inspired mob here, but they have the spear, so they're just throwing down the spear. They need to finish off that inspired mob though, otherwise they're not going to be able to interrupt the Goliath after it comes out. So interesting to see that they're still pulling this off, and there we go, the inspired mob is dead, so they can finish off the Goliath here and the Inquisitor while also getting interrupts off. But yeah, just a big pull into big pull by Perplexed and Golden Guardians as well, just doing the same thing on their side.
Yeah, one thing to note about the way these spears function is that they will retroactively stun, right? If you throw it down and there are some mobs that are outside of it and then you knock them in or they run in, they will end up getting stunned as well. And so both teams actually used that. They threw the spear before everything was fully grouped just to give them that little bit of breathing room, and then they'd bring in whatever else needed to come. Golden Guardians, though, looks like their strategy is going to be a little bit slower on this side because they still have they use that spear, but they didn't have that entire Ether Diver patrol involved. Perhaps that was just due to its patrol position. It was maybe on the far side, and so they couldn't easily grab it. But that's going to add quite a bit of extra time to their dungeon here, as those aren't going to be taking that bonus damage from the spear being down. And of course, Fired Up's Combustion did not hit all of them as effectively. Meanwhile, Perplexed are already on to this pull before Ventinac's second boss here. They've crowd-controlled 2 of the mobs up at the top of the stairs, and they'll be fighting these 3, including the squad leader, which does that nasty AoE damage reduction aura, so they are going to focus it down. And then they'll have those 2 crowd-controlled mobs, which they can actually pull onto that boss. And it's easy enough to deal with them with the boss, because the boss has no other interrupts or anything else like that that needs to be handled on itself. And it actually gives them a little bit of damage bonus to be fighting that third target, getting those trick shots out from their hunter. So it's a nice little efficiency optimization on a pull that's very hard to do. If you tried to fight all 5 of these at once and then you were spawning the Pride on the first thing that died, you would be in quite a bit of trouble. And so they've come up with this really nice way of sequencing everything.
It looked like Yoda got carried up by the whirlwind and then he fell off right before he reached the platform. That's going to be a pretty decent time loss for Golden Guardians. Now he did manage to get carried up, but yeah, that was just another time loss for them, unfortunately. And yeah, this misposition of the patrol, of the Ether Diver patrol, really cost them quite a bit. Because not only did they not get that spear damage, they also had to CC the inspired Ether Diver, because obviously they didn't have a spear anymore, and then they had to finish it off after the rest of the pack. So yeah, very unfortunate with the patrol timing for Golden Guardians here, while Perplexed is already fighting Ventinex now after they dealt with that 60% Pride. They're also cleaving down that trash, as you mentioned, so just very, very efficient, being able to just deal with some of the trash here at the same time as just dealing with the boss. Of course, the Inquisitor, if you have enough interrupts, not too big of a deal. Of course, if you don't interrupt, then it can be really deadly on this boss because of the bleed that this boss also casts on a ranged player. So if you get a Dark Clash from the Inquisitor plus a bleed, or one of those magic debuffs that it also casts, then it can be incredibly deadly. But no problem for Perplexed as they now finish off Ventinex.
Yeah, one nice thing about this composition against that boss as well is that you get that Holy Paladin, which brings Bop. And so if there is ever somebody who is under a lot of danger from the bleed, you can always just bop it off. I don't know if their bop is used for anything else in the near future. It's something that a lot of the bops that the Paladins do bring are committed to usually the start of a pull, right? You'll either bop the Hunter or the Demon Hunter, who will run around and grab threat on everything, and that will let them group everything up nice and easily without there being any casts or deaths to really worry about from doing that. So that's sometimes the bops are being saved for that. But I don't think that's how they're going to do any of the pulls in the future. So I think that they do have that bop available if needed for one of the bleeds here. You can actually see Fired Up under a lot of pressure on the side of Golden Guardians. It's going to be his Cauterize there as well that's being committed. And the bleed Did quite a bit of damage to him, but he's going to be okay. Perplexed, making their way up now.
The dwarf and the dark iron dwarf racial would be working as well on the blade, right? So we see the Shadow Priests and the Paladins have that available to them in case they have the bleed, which is on cooldown for both Shakib and Swag. So I assume both of them actually used it for that bleed. So that was nicely done using those racials to just make it a little bit easier on the healers.
That's a very good point. Yeah, that's one of the powerful... If you're not using Shadow Melds to facilitate any skips, those Dwarf or Dark Iron Dwarf racials are so absurdly powerful. But look at this pull that Perplexed is now doing here. This is their second spear of the dungeon, so they won't have any spears available for that triple Kyrian Angel pull right at the end of the dungeon. But they really need it to make this pull work, because this is a very, very scary set of enemies with those Hellions in there. They are going to be okay, though. Divine, at that 33% health, is just barely going to be able to survive there. Looks like he used his blood-spattered scale trinket, if I had to guess what that huge shield was on him. Wow.
Yeah, just incredibly well done, because this is a pull we've seen teams wide to, and it's even more difficult this week because of that inspiring, right? So we've seen, for example, Perplexed just to see that Warden off to the side, and now they're pulling it into the Pride. So they didn't want to deal with that Warden at all as they're pulling the rest of it. It looks like Golden Guardians is doing the same thing. So they pulled the Warden to the side, managed to get a CC on it, and now they're gathering up the rest of the trash. But you need a huge amount of damage to be able to pull this off. Oh! The fist is going through for Golden Guardians as the Goliath was not actually inside the spear AoE, but thankfully they did survive it, so they might be able to finish this off. But this is going to be incredibly dangerous for them as the mobs need to die quickly, otherwise they're going to be running out of interrupts.
Wow, I cannot believe they've survived that. That was so much damage to their entire group there. But JP is able to just barely keep everybody alive. Several members dropping to 10% or lower on the side of Golden Guardians, but they have recovered from this, and it's actually not going to cost them basically any time at all. That Goliath casting was really, really unfortunate. But they are going to be okay, as they now are going to do the exact same pull as Perplexed here with that Warden coming into the Pride, but they've just lost something on the order of 30 seconds over this dungeon. I think mostly just due to Perplexed executing the same pulls, but slightly faster, because there really has been no difference between these teams. Both teams are on a zero-death run, but something has to make up why these two teams have 2 minutes difference on their time trial times, and I think it might just be, Perplexed just moving a little bit faster through the whole dungeon.
Yeah, it really just seemed like different kinds of offensive cooldown usages, maybe a little bit more efficiency here and there with their focus target damage on the higher HP mobs. We also saw on one of the pulls the Praetor jumped out on the Golden Guardian side, meaning they had to put a lot more damage into the Praetor because he didn't manage to get all that cleave damage. So really just a bunch of smaller things here and there. Because Golden Guardians is playing really well, of course, with that zero-death run, right? This is incredibly clean by them. Just like slightly less efficient compared to Perplexed, who is just having such a smooth and clean and very efficient run. Divine Field almost going down here, as this boss is actually one of the few bosses that does not clear debuffs once you finish off the boss. So you still have those orb debuffs, and you also have the targeted debuff from the boss once the boss dies. So the healer still needs to make sure that to keep everyone alive.
Yeah, it's one of the quirks of this dungeon is the experience of having 10 stacks after this boss dies and just falling over as your healer is now ignoring you. I think that it is incredible to Golden Guardians' credit here that they have kept this game so close against Perplexed's, #1 time trial time, and they are on pace to match that time. And one thing to remember about this dungeon is it is never over until those three angels go down, right? If there is an angel healing fiasco, or if there's just a death to them, that usually spells minutes worth of time loss here, and it's happened to basically every single team, except I think maybe for like Obey Alliance, but I believe almost everybody has had trouble with those angels at different points here. This combination of affixes, it's not the hardest we've ever seen. We've had Fortified Raging before, and now we just have Fortified. Storming can throw a little bit of a wrench into the plan, potentially, but for the most part, it's just that Fortified Affix that they're going to try and deal with here, and this will be the make-or-break moment now for Perplexed. If you're a Golden Guardians fan, you're really hoping that Perplexed messes this pull up, and it is one of the hardest pulls in the dungeon. All three of the angels are going to come in at the same time, and not only do they crank out an ever-increasing amount of damage on the entire group, as you can see those stacks of debuffs increasing the damage and increasing the damage taken of the entire group here, They also need to make sure they kill all 3 mobs within about 2 seconds of each other. If they fail to do that, any remaining ones are going to full heal and gain all the abilities of the killed ones. But you can see, wow, just look at the damage that Perplexed is putting out here. These mobs are already sub 50%. They need to make sure they save enough bursts here for the end to make sure that they can kill whichever one is highest. That is very important, especially without that Windwalker Monk, without that Touch of Death to help equalize here. Here we can see they're all now sub 5%. They're doing a really good job here. Once the first one dies, that'll be the start of the 2-second timer here to kill all 3. Divine is under a lot of pressure, though. He still has his cheat death available. And there's the first death, and they've killed all 3. Beautiful, beautiful execution there by Perplexed. All 3 angels dead within, they still had a second or 2 before it would have been a problem. So years in angel time. They're starting up this pride now, and that, I mean, Perplexed has really cleared the last big hurdle of this dungeon.
Yeah, that was incredibly well done by Perplexed as they finished off all of those 3 angels almost exactly at the same time. Now they decided to deal with this pride, which is something we've seen those teams skip in the past by using invisibility potions, but Perplexed just deciding to play it and pull it on top of the boss. So once the pride reached 50%, they just decided to pull it on top of Devos, which might have something to do with the spear change, because this boss actually had a weird interaction with the achievement spears that spawned over the boss. Basically, you had your healer jump down, get the wings, pick up the spears that are spawning in the air, throw it onto Devos, which would spawn those intermission orbs to get a bigger spear that does a huge amount of damage to the boss. So by not having those, the boss actually takes quite a lot longer, and maybe that's why they decided that it's actually worth it to deal with this pride, because you can pull it on top of the boss, just cleave it down with the boss, and then you have that pride buff, which actually gives you quite a lot of damage. Golden Guardians, though, did manage to finish off that angel pull as well, and you can see just how clean they're playing too on their side. But it's still just like 30% boss HP behind and 1 full pride mob behind. So yeah, even though they are playing this cleanly, Perplexed is just playing slightly more efficient.
Yeah, this is so brutal for Golden Guardians because the run they are putting up here, I mean, it's good enough to beat almost everybody. It's good enough to probably beat many, if not most, of Perplexed or Echo's runs. It's just not good enough to beat this perfect run that we're seeing out of Perplexed. But it is an extremely strong start to the series here. Things aren't over yet, though. Perplexed does still have the last little bit of this boss to deal with. However, with Fortified being the active affix and not Tyrannical, and without any serious operative affixes on this boss fight, it would be quite a throw to wipe to this boss from this position that Perplexed is in. They've cleared almost all of the hard parts of this dungeon now. They really just need to make sure they're staying clean on execution here. What would be the most embarrassing would be landing or missing one of the spears out of the intermission phase. But I think they even have enough wiggle room now that even if that were to happen, they should be okay here. You can see just over the course of these incremental advantages they've built up over the dungeon, they have a 50% health lead on Devos. And I mean, it's going to be something like a minute that they win this dungeon by, which is, I mean, it seems like a lot, but it is incredible that this is a 0 death run from both teams. In Spires of Ascension of all dungeons, this is one of our least commonly 0 death dungeons. This is one of the ones where it's such a long dungeon with also so many difficult parts in it. So really impressive work here by both these teams, but it is going to be Perplexed at the end of the day with that faster run with slightly better optimization of the entire thing. That's going to take game 1 here up against Golden Guardians.
Yeah, Devos is about to go down for Perplexed as they threw that last spear. And what a clean one by Perplexed. I mean, that was just incredible to see as they're beating Golden Guardians 1-0 in the Spires.
That's right, Perplexed taking that victory and sealing game number 1 at the very least for them. But yeah, like Dreadnoughts, you were mentioning, you know, this is usually not a dungeon that we really see that many clean runs in, that we don't see any sort of big catastrophes in. Partially probably helped out by the fact that it's a time trial dungeon, so there's a lot of help there, but these teams also had to practice it again and, you know, reinforce their runs as well with the new patch changes.
Yeah, and you know, given that patch change, that explains how Perplexed's run here was about 40 seconds slower than their time trial run, particularly the fact that they couldn't use a lot of those strategies that teams have been using to save time on the last boss, using those achievement spears, which have been removed from Mythic difficulty, using the Pride skip, which is something that's a lot harder to execute now. So really impressive that Perplexed managed to keep it here within 40 seconds of their time trial run. But honestly, I'm more impressed, even though Perplexed has won here this map, I'm more impressed by Golden Guardians' performance as well, because Golden Guardians improved on their time trial time despite a less favorable patch, right? Their time trial time was 20 minutes, 30 seconds or so. They were going to finish this dungeon something like a minute faster than that, which is a really good sign here for this team. It means, I think, that they are very much alive in this series and alive in this tournament, and really a contender against any of these teams that we can put them up against, which hasn't always been true in our previous Cup weekends.
Yeah, and it's kind of going back to what we were saying as well, Zyro, about their further development, getting used to basically just the new team that they've sort of been building around and trying to develop, because they have such experienced players, but building the rapport as well just takes time.
Yeah, for sure. And it looks like the rapport is finally coming into fruition for them. Like, they're kind of playing together as a team a lot better than what we saw from them in the previous Cups. And, you know, it can't be stated enough, you know, the improvement from the Spires that we saw 2 weeks ago in Cup 3 from them was, you know, light years away from what we saw today, which was essentially a zero death run. Yeah, they fed a couple deaths right at the end, but they were already a minute or so behind, so I don't want to throw that too much out of favor with them. But yeah, if this is the team that they're going to be moving forward, they're setting themselves up for way more success than what we've seen in the previous Cups.
Yeah, let's start breaking down that Spires, because like you mentioned it, otherwise just very clean run besides a little bit at the end.
Yeah, I kind of want to talk about the game of inches here, because, right, if you looked at that entire dungeon, it looked like Perplexed was pulling ahead seemingly to, like, no real reason. But one of the biggest things in this dungeon that we don't really cover too often is making sure you get this Ether Diver Patrol into your initial Carrion Spear AoE here. Golden Guardians was something like 20 seconds off of that happening, and you can see it executed perfectly here from Perplexed. That Ether Diver pack is instantly on top of the rest of the group based off the timing in their dungeon. They're able to get everything on top of the Carrion Spear, get all of their initial AoE burst in, and it saves them a ridiculous amount of time just on this pull alone. You know, of the minute lead they had, built themselves up to the end of the dungeon, I'd say that alone probably accounted for about half of it. And the only real way to get that lineup perfectly is to just play increments, tiny little inches better for every single pull leading up to that. And, you know, maybe Golden Guardians isn't quite there yet, but they're definitely on their way.
Dude, did you see how they moved that skirmisher into the spear? I missed it the first time around.
Yeah.
They mind controlled it and then ran it in and then dropped it inside the spear so that it would get included in that AoE. Very impressive. Very good heads up play there. Nice support priest maneuver there.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of like little mind control techs coming around as well, especially when the Shadow Priests have been, you know, rising up throughout the ranks. You love to be able to see that bit of utility getting utilized. So Plaguefall is going to be our next dungeon, though. We've got Tyrannical, Spiteful, Grievous going into this one. Nagura, yesterday, we saw JB busting out the Druid. How did you like how that performed?
I mean, they did well, right? The thing was, of course, they played against a team that had like 12 deaths or more. So, of course, it wasn't like a good comparison because the other team did not play up to their best. But I think I still liked it in that dungeon specifically, just because the Druid has so much utility for Plaguefall. You have all of those tiny little like mass roots and vortex that you can use to line up everything better. And I think Plaguefall is a dungeon where a lot of the time that you save in that dungeon is coming from Plague Borers and just buffs around that dungeon. So having a lot of control that makes these pulls easier is going to be worth it, right? Of course, you're going to be losing out on that Ash and Hollow damage. So in the end, it's just dependent on is it worth it or not to get that extra control to maybe deal with the Plague Borer era a little bit easier and missing out on that Ash and Hollow damage. We're going to have to see.
Yeah, and you know, we've been looking at how people have been adjusting their strategies and adjusting some of the compositions, but we never really saw Druid coming out onto it. So I think there's also the question, Dranos, of, well, we know it's going to be coming up on this one, but what other dungeons is there good potential for it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an open question. I think that this dungeon in particular, with the way that Golden Guardians use that Fungal Mancer and they bring it along with them throughout the whole place. I mean, Golden Guardians is one of the first teams that we saw really using that. They used it in weeks where other teams were not interested in that strategy of keeping that Fungal Mancer around, spell stealing off of it, really making I'm Fired Up into just this skyscraper of a mage, casting those huge flame strikes. And I think that is something that the Druid really helps facilitate, because the Druid is providing those entangling roots, those mass roots, the ability to just keep everything under control, to provide some healing in the you know, with the efflorescence and everything, making sure that you can keep the tightly packed group, as you have on several of these bosses, really healed up, where there is quite a lot of boss damage here in this dungeon. All 4 bosses in this dungeon are pretty high threat, there's a pretty good chance that you're going to come under a lot of HPS requirement, a lot of throughput needed. And sometimes there, if you're playing the Paladin, right, you're really focused on that damage instead. And once your Ashen Hallow is down, once your Wings is down, you've used all your cooldowns offensively, and then you're trying to do a lot of healing at the same time. And you already used all those cooldowns. You already used them for damage, right? That's not something that Druid runs into. I think Druid really gives you that more balanced, more utility-oriented setup that lets the rest of your group shine, instead lets the rest of the group use all of their power on damage and damage alone.
Yeah, it's been very interesting to look at how a lot of the classes have been kind of supporting and interacting each other throughout the series and all of MDI so far, Zyro. I mean, Priest was just kind of the beginning where you're looking at how you can take advantage of the Night Fae Covenant. We've also been seeing, Vengeance Demon Hunter switching covenants for the benefit of the group. It's really been showing how impactful a lot of the changes, even with 905, have been coming around for making sure everybody has all the buffs.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't say it's
except for
everybody has all the
PLAGUEFALL.
buffs, right? It's literally just, hey, there's
every buff in the dungeon is
facilitating
represented.
the
There
fire.
you go.
Mate. Yeah, no, I know what you mean. Right? They're really kind of swapping the group comp around. But the meta we're in right now is more shifted towards making sure you're setting up your mage for the highest success possible.
Yeah.
And Plaguefall really plays into that to an even higher degree. Not only do you have your entire group kind of making the mage the most important person in the group, but you also play around the Fungalmancer. And that's something that's pretty difficult to do. The mage has to manage their mana perfectly. If they don't do it perfectly, you drop your buff, you lose your 6 or 7 stack of that damage buff, and you are setting yourself up for failure on the next pull. If you're used to having a mage doing double damage in their combust to set up a major pull and they don't have that, you're gonna wipe horrifically. So it requires a lot of intricate movement, a lot of intricate CC from your group, making sure your mage is properly playing. And Golden Guardians has one of the mages in the world who's really good at doing that. So let's see if they're going to be able to pull it off here.
That's right. Game number 2 getting rolling right now as Plaguefall gets underway.
All right, so let's see what Perplexed can show us here in this dungeon, as we haven't seen them in Plaguefall yet. But of course, Golden Guardians played this dungeon yesterday with that Rest Druid as we talked about, so Perplexed had the chance of actually watching Golden Guardians' strategy and maybe even adapt their own strategy if they saw something that Golden Guardians might have done better. But they did not change their healer to a Rest Druid, so Perplexed definitely thinks that that's not needed.
Yeah, Perplexed sticking with that Holy Paladin here. Although it's not necessarily true that they would 100% do that if they had infinite time to practice, right? Sometimes your strategy is pretty good, and even if you think, okay, maybe the other team has a 20-second faster strategy, you just don't have the practice time to be able to get your, to be able to take their strategy and get it up to that level as well. As you can see, Perplexed here, they have that Manifestation of Pride spawned. So do the Golden Guardians, so both teams able to execute this first pull at right around the same time. Although the Guardians actually have this Plague Rock involved in things as well that is not active on the side of Perplexed. Fired Up is getting those spell steals from the Wonder Grow here. It's a little bit scary, though, if you're seeing on the side of Golden Guardians, that Wonder Grow is affecting the Manifestation of Pride and the Plague Rock and the Fungalmancer, which means there's more targets for Fired Up to spell steal, but you can see he's already running pretty low on his mana there, and he really needs to spell steal those mobs for defensive value as well. When you have a Manifestation of Pride with Wonder Grow stacks, that's a scary place to be. That's the Pride dead, though, now, and so Golden Guardians are going to finish off the Fungalmancer and the Plague Rock. Perplexed, though, already getting started with the boss here as Divine is going to drop to sub 8% health, barely staying alive. That's the Bloodlust coming out from the team. A lot of Grievous stacks, though, but it will be quickly handled by Ryson thanks to that Prideful buff and the Bloodlust, and they are dealing with all of those adds, and then they're using that Plague Stomp to move them away from the Spiteful Shades, as they already wanted to do. A really good use of the boss mechanics. That's a really well-practiced strategy that we're seeing here. Golden Guardians moving into this pull as well. They aren't going straight into boss, though. They are just continuing a slower and steadier approach to the dungeon.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very risky pull, in my opinion, by Perplexed, pulling all of these slimes on top of the boss, because this boss is definitely doing a lot of group damage already with that stomp and that disease debuff that you have on everybody afterwards. And then you also have Grievous and the Spiteful Shades that are going to be spawning out of those slimes, so incredibly well executed by Perplexed. And the amount of damage they had to deal with this boss, just insane with that buff on Wolf Disco's mage. Just incredibly well done. Golden Guardians now also dealing with that boss. Doing it a little bit slower, of course, because they dealt with the slimes before they engaged with the boss. So they used the combustion for the slimes, not having it for the boss here at then pull. But I'm Up still doing a huge amount of damage. Now, very unfortunate that he cannot actually give a mage innervate. Otherwise, the druid would be really useful, as the mage could actually be spell stealing a lot more. But unfortunately, you cannot buff damage dealers. You should change that. Buff druids.
As Perplexed are getting started now with this big AoE trash pull, and Divine is under a lot of danger here. There's that manifestation of Pride spawning as well. Wolf Disco really needs to kill everything off really fast, but he's done it. Look at that damage that he's been putting out here. 73k is the final number that he'll reach there. That Fungalmancer's actually staying alive as well. They crowd controlled it outside, and they haven't brought it with them. Or, I mean, they didn't bring it into that pull and kill it, and it looks like they aren't intending to just yet either. They have a little bit more use for this Fungalmancer still on this next pull. Let's see what Golden Guardians are able to do here, because this, I think, is an area where if Golden Guardians is able to do in one pull what Perplexed is able to do in two, they might be able to catch a little bit back up with that time that Perplexed gained from pulling all that trash onto the boss. And you can see, yeah, there's more mobs coming in here for the Guardians than Perplexed dealt with in their version of this pull. All those mobs that Perplexed just dealt with as their second pull of this area are included in this pull for the Guardians. That Fungalmancer is here as well. Their Fungalmancer is going to die. So both teams are now done with their Fungalmancers. If the Guardians can make this work, though, that'll really help them stay close here behind Perplexed. Perplexed, though, still working a little bit ahead of where the Golden Guardians are. It is working out for them, though. Both teams have been able to execute these really difficult pulls. Again, still... Oh, JP! JP goes down right as I was saying that it was a clean pull, but unfortunately, right towards the end here, they have these mobs that have come in and are somehow really high on health. And Lip down as well. They didn't get the rest
off, so this is going to be a full team wipe. They did not have the battle rest going off here on JB, and it was the Pride just pulsing on everybody, so they didn't manage to recover without that battle rest on their healer, and everyone just going down. Just huge time loss here for Golden Guardians, as they thankfully did manage to finish off most of the trash, but still a huge time loss as they all have to walk back here, up to 50% trash. The Pride is, of course, not going to regen its HP to full, so not losing that time that they did, the damage that they did on the Pride, but still just very unfortunate for Golden Guardians making such a mistake there. Perplexed, on the other hand, about to finish off that 60% Pride, so they're already moving on to that second boss.
Yeah, Perplexed, let's see what they're going to be able to make happen here in this second boss room, as Golden Guardians are going to try and recover and try and catch back up here, but they were already a little bit behind before their wipe, and now after the wipe, they are certainly at a sizable disadvantage here. Perplexed getting started here. Perplexed, actually, is that Necrolord that Divine is playing? Is that what he's...
Yeah.
So, yeah, Necrolord
Yoda
playing...
too.
Yoda and Necrolord both on that Necrolord Covenant, which is going to let them get that benefit when you walk near those slimes of having that Fleshcraft passive absorb them. And so you'll be giving your group some nice AoE haste and damage reduction in this area. That's pretty valuable, actually, and it does represent quite a bit of extra damage onto Dr. Ickes here, as long as he's able to stay nice and close to the rest of his team there. And this is a really impressive pull that Perplexed are putting together here. All of the trash and the boss at the same time is not something that's easy to do. Wolf Disco actually doing a great job there, getting back over the heads-up play of Dragons breathing those oozes before they'll transform so they don't become too much of a problem after the big abomination died. And this is a pull, actually, that we saw the Golden Guardians make happen yesterday of the trash plus the boss at the same time. Very impressive that teams are able to make it happen. Perplexed, though, are opting for a different path with the Plague Bomb than other teams have been using. Perplexed is just going to try and destroy that Plague Bomb before it explodes, rather than soak the damage and survive with their defensives. I'm not sure whether that's something they always intend to do, or something that maybe they made as a split-second judgment call based on having defensives down. Although it looks like most of their defensives are up, so maybe their plan is just, you know what, the safe way to do this, the safe way to avoid wiping is just to kill that Plague Bomb, not worry about it, and not use all of our defensives to try and survive it.
Maybe Ryzen didn't have bubble available. We don't see the bubble cooldown, so that's maybe a possibility, because I think without the bubble, he's probably not going to survive it. But either way, they're ahead at this point, so maybe it's just better for them to just play it safe, making sure they just finish off that Plague Bomb. But now they're definitely not going to be finishing off the Plague Bomb, because this is the last platform, so they can just finish off the boss instead. We have to combust by Wolf Disco being popped, standing in that pool on the ground, because it actually gives you haste if you stand there. It also does ticking damage to you, but that's nothing that Ryzen cannot heal away, so it's worth it for them to just have that extra haste on Wolf Disco whenever combust is up. Divine Field might have still flash crafted that that pool afterwards to get that haste with him. But you definitely need to make sure you look at the cooldown. Sometimes it's just not ready to get the haste buff on Divine Field. And sometimes it's not even feasible for the players to even stand in range, because you have to be really close to the player that has the buff to be able to get the haste.
They actually, they changed how it works this patch, so you don't even need to press your Fleshcraft button anymore. You just need to walk near them, and your Fleshcraft passive absorbs their essence. It's something that was used as part of when they reworked Fleshcraft. They did a lot of little buffs to it, and that included the way that it functions in this dungeon, where you don't actually have to press it to get the value at all in this place, which it's pretty nice. It's a pretty nice buff to that Covenant. Necrolord Covenant was one of the ones that we saw the least of outside of perhaps Theater of Pain, where teams felt it was really necessary. And it's nice to see, you can see that Infernal spawning, that is the Necrolord proc there for Divine Field. Those dungeons being summoned in, or those demons getting summoned in, that he can then explode for some extra damage and healing. So it's cool to see a little bit more representation there of that Covenant, and definitely the value from those oozes is pretty big, though. Wow, look at all this damage that's coming out as they have a lot of those little spiderlings here ambushing. Good job of making sure that they're keeping them crowd controlled and not letting them ambush. Unfortunately for the Golden Guardians, though, we actually have a death coming down. It looks like the Plague Bomb explosion ends up claiming Lip's life. They've been able to use the Battle Res on him, but that is not a good thing, because now they don't have a Battle Res. They'll have another one actually in the very near future.
Yeah, they should be able to recover from this. Let's see if they have enough damage to finish off the boss here without targeting the Plague Bomb. But yeah, just some more issues for Golden Guardians, as Perplexed is fighting Domina Venomblade with the Pride and a Sniper. So that's actually incredibly dangerous for Perplexed here, as they have to deal with all of those mechanics at the same time. The pulsing AoE, you see Ryzen dropping incredibly low.
Oh no!
Actually going down. They do have a Battle Res available. Ashan immediately casts the Battle Res and gets Ryzen back up. But yeah, this is the difficulty. But you see how everyone is dropping incredibly low just because of the Pride, the last tick that it actually got off right before the Assassins also spawned. So huge AoE damage. Let's see if Ryzen can actually recover from this. Because of that death, he's falling behind on the Grievous healing.
Yeah, I mean, thankfully he has that prideful buff helping everybody out, and you know what? Thankfully his team is there as well. Swag there, targeted by that stun circle, identified he was low on health, identified that the rest of the group was in trouble as well, so his last two globals before he got stunned were two Shadow Mems on himself, and that allowed him to stay alive, and that gave Ryzen the breathing room that he needed to help keep everybody else alive, and that heads-up play here from the side of Perplexed is going to prevent a really, really sketchy situation from turning into a full team wipe there. It cannot be overstated how difficult it is to fight Domina Venomblade with the Pride and with the Sniper at the same time on a plus 18 Tyrannical Key, but somehow they've been able to survive that, even though Ryzen had so much targeting him that it caused him to die at the start there. I mean, do you see what happened to him? He got targeted by the stun, he was already low on health, and then one of the Brute Assassins spawned right on top of him and I think meleeed him out of stealth and just ended his existence there, and they were able to get him back up, but still, I mean, with that level of bad luck happening to one person, the fact that it doesn't turn into a wipe, even when you have to expend that Battle Res. Divine, though, is under a lot of attack here. Ryzen gets stunned and is not able to heal Divine up. They do have another Battle Res. Shine is going to get that out. Everybody needs to stabilize here, though, so that they can stay alive, and luckily it's just Domina Venomblade that's up, no other adds, so that's one taunt, and Divine is able to get threat back. But this pull has now cost Perplexed two of their Battle Reses, and Divine is still under a lot of threat here. Luckily, the next stun is going on a Shine rather than Ryzen, and that means that Ryzen will be able to keep everybody healed up there. They do need to break out all these Brute Assassins, though. You can see Wolf Disco going on an adventure there to cast a Dragon's Breath and break out one far away. They have all of them now. Good proc on this Demon as well is going to provide some nice damage and healing for Divine, and it looks like they have weathered the storm here. Domina Venomblade is going to go down. It did not go down without a fight. That is two Battle Reses. All of the Battle Reses that Perplexed will have in this dungeon were committed to make that pull work, but they saved a lot of time by being able to combine the Pride, the Boss, and the Sniper. So, I mean, job well done by them. That was so scary.
Yeah, and that was incredibly, I mean, that was pretty unlucky too, getting both of those stunts on Ryzen in those crucial moments when you have everything going on at the same time. So well done to be able to recover from this death on their healer while everyone is just full on stacked with Grievous and Divine Field just struggling to stay alive. So well recovered as they finished off that boss and now are dealing with this last boss room with all the devoted here, which are just randomly being cleaved down by AoE. You see Divine Field just standing in the middle there, gripping everything and then jumping away. Actually, pretty well done that he's managing to just tank all of this. Usually we see them just walk all over the place, and Divine Field just standing there making sure everything is walking towards him so he can get the AoE on all of the Devoted. So well done by them as they now deal with those Spiteful Shades. And Iker as well, the last mini-boss they have to do to get that Pride buff. We see most of the teams just completely ignore the slimes on the right side of this room just because it's not worth it to go all the way to the right side, go back. The buffs that you get from the Necrolord, really not worth the time that you have to spend to go over there.
Yeah, but wow, look at what Perplexed is up to right now. Oh no, look at that boast just shooting on through their whole team there. They're gonna be all right though, as they have their Bloodlust popped. They don't have much room for error here. No battle res is available as they are trying to fight this Pride with the boss. That is not an easy thing to do, but Golden Guardians are having trouble as well. They are also using their last battle res there as Shakib ended up going down on their side. Perplexed though, they really need to stabilize here. Once they can do that, once Ryson can get everybody out of Grievous Rain here and heal them through that Infectious Rain, they will be able to stabilize here as the boss is heading down into that intermission. And Perplexed they've done it. They've managed to make that Pride onto the boss work out, and that is not as easy as it looked for them.
Yeah, that was actually incredibly risky pull, having all of that AoE damage from the boss and the Pride as well. And back to back too, especially when they saw they have no more battle reses, right? They had so much trouble with pulling the Pride on top of the boss previously. The fact that they decided to do it again on this boss without any sort of, battle reses available, without any last resort on Divine Field is incredibly confident, and the fact that they pulled it off is just good to see. That's Perplexed having such a clean run again. They do have 2 deaths, of course, on the board because of those 2 deaths they had on Venom Blade, but outside of that, really, really well done. Golden Guardians now also managed to reach this last boss area, but they just lost too much time on that full team wipe that they had. But if you look at the point where they are in the dungeon right now, they're not that far behind to Perplexed even with that wipe. So Golden Guardians definitely having a really quick route and strat here, just wasn't gonna be the case here with that full team wipe, costing them so much time, unfortunately.
Yeah, you know what? I think Golden Guardians have done this latter half of the dungeon faster than Perplexed were doing it.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, they lost so much time as a result of that wipe and the first boss there. But I think that if that hadn't happened, if they were able to... Oh, God, Divine, look at the health there. Very, very, very scary situation, and they don't have that battle res. Perplexed actually could still be in a lot of trouble here, but they're able to get that last little percentage down. That could have been a disaster. It is not, though. Perplexed is going to take this series 2-0 against Golden Guardians after that Plaguefall.
That's right, Perplexed is going to be moving on with the victory in Plaguefall, sending Golden Guardians down into the lower bracket here. Very well played here in Plaguefall, Zyro.
Yeah, and also completing the dungeon a solid 2 minutes faster than what we saw from Golden Guardians yesterday. So even if Golden Guardians was on top of their game and playing safe here, they wouldn't have been able to hold a candle to what we just saw from Plex there. A super, super fast run, with a couple of mistakes that were mitigated by battle reses.
That's right, and just being able to have that kind of backup plan on hand, and we've been already looking at how well, they're also just not making too many egregious mistakes. One of the biggest things that Perplexed has just been improving on so steadily and so well throughout this entire season, Dratnos, has just been minimizing deaths and then making sure that they don't compound into bigger problems.
I mean, yeah, it's so hard to imagine surviving from the situations they were in during that Dominant Venom Blade encounter with those players. I mean, it's not like they had 2 random deaths in battle reses. Their tank and their healer were the players who died at crucial moments during that fight while they had other ads going on as well. And somehow they were able to stabilize both of those deaths without them cascading into a full-sized wipe. That is what separates Perplexed from the rest of the field here in our tournament, from everybody except for Echo, is that ability to just recover these situations where you look at them and you're like, this is a wipe. And somehow it's not a wipe. Somehow they're going to be okay. Yeah. Somehow all 4 of the surviving players know exactly what they need to do to prevent it from turning into a wipe. And that is incredibly impressive. And yeah, like Zahra said, 15 minutes, 40 seconds out of Perplexed is a completely absurd Plaguefall time, especially given that the boss they probably lost something like 20 seconds on. I mean, that is incredible.
Yep, from yesterday.